Imagine you're trapped in a metal tube, thousands of feet in the air, and everything goes completely dark. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're taking a deep dive into the mechanics of a truly terrifying piece of microfiction called Flight 717, The Eternal Descent over the North Sea. You know, it's fascinating. What exactly makes a super short piece of horror so effective? How does a writer manage to craft such a gripping, suffocating atmosphere in just a handful of sentences? Well, today we're going to deconstruct this text to see exactly how the author builds suspense, manipulates our deepest anxieties, and, honestly, just executes an absolute masterclass in atmospheric dread. Let's get into it. To really understand why this text works as well as it does, we kind of have to start right here. Think about it for a second. What is your absolute biggest fear at 30,000 feet? I mean, is it the plane suddenly shaking? Is it some weird, unexplained mechanical noise? Or is it just the profound, undeniable claustrophobia of being sealed in a pressurized metal tube with a bunch of strangers with absolutely zero control over your own fate? The author hooks us right out of the gate by tapping directly into these universal, incredibly relatable anxieties about commercial flying. Before we even touch anything supernatural, the text builds this baseline of everyday discomfort that pretty much anyone who's ever boarded a plane can feel right in their gut.
Part 1. The Midnight Departure.
So the text lays out our starting parameters. It's a freezing midnight flight heading from Liverpool to Edinburgh. By kicking things off with such a recognizable, if slightly miserable scenario, a cold, late-night regional flight, the author successfully strips away our defenses and creates a baseline of vulnerability. You're exhausted, you're freezing, it's pitch black outside. We are totally grounded in our physical reality here. And that's a brilliant move, because it makes the impending shift into the impossible feel so much more jarring.
Moving into Part 2, the escalation of terror.
Just look at the sheer pacing of this timeline straight from the story. First up, turbulence hits. Totally normal occurrence, right? But then, step 2, every single time the plane shakes, a passenger vanishes, just gone, completely silently. Step 3, an elderly woman suddenly screams at something outside the window. And then, boom, step 4, total power outage. The author maps out this sequence to just relentlessly accelerate. There is no time to breathe. We are rocketed from mild, expected turbulence into utter, inexplicable chaos in the blink of an eye.
And then we get this incredibly stark contrast. On one hand, you have the completely mundane reaction of the flight attendants, who are desperately trying to rationalize these silent vanishings by blaming it on fear and exhaustion. But they're up against an impossible reality. The missing travelers don't just disappear. They leave behind warm seats and this highly unsettling smell of wet ash. Think about that for a second. That specific sensory detail, wet ash, it's visceral. You can't just logic that away. It violently shoves the reader out of the mundane world and right into the terrifying reality of the horror. Which brings us to exactly why that elderly woman was screaming. The text describes what she sees through the cabin window, and it is absolute nightmare fuel. Pale, human shapes physically crawling across the wings of the plane. And the way the author layers the sensory details here is just perfect. It's pouring rain outside, right? And these shapes have hollow eyes that are locked entirely on the cabin windows. The threat isn't just inside the plane anymore with people vanishing. Now there's an active, monstrous external threat literally closing in on them.
This takes us to Part 3, the 1996 revelation.
1996. Let that year just hang in the air for a moment. According to the text, the captain's trembling voice suddenly crackles over the intercom, and he reveals that, according to air traffic control, Flight 717 actually disappeared over the North Sea in 1996. It was never recovered. Talk about a massive narrative pivot. This completely shatters the timeline. The passengers are suddenly hit with the realization that they aren't just on a doomed flight. Actually, scratch that. They're on a ghost flight. They have literally been missing for decades.
The psychological toll of this specific moment is absolutely brilliant. All the passengers' phones simultaneously lose signal, which, let's be honest, is a very everyday modern anxiety. But then, one terrifying notification manages to ping through. Everyone starts receiving missing person reports containing their very own names and photos. It completely strips away their present reality. They're staring at their own historical obituaries right there on their glowing screens. It absolutely obliterates any lingering hope of survival, because to the outside world, they are already long dead.
Part 4, the final descent.
So, with the visual element completely removed by the blackout, the author deliberately pivots to auditory horror. The text describes something moving slowly down the dark aisle, dragging heavy chains across the floor. We never actually see what this entity is. We just hear that slow, deliberate, metallic scrape of the chains getting closer. And keeping the creature unseen is such a smart move because it forces your imagination to fill in the absolute worst-case scenario.
And then, through the darkness, we get a single line of dialogue. The unseen entity whispers, "This flight only lands once." Wow, it's such a chilling delivery. This is the ultimate point of no return for both the passengers and the narrative. It confirms their eternal damnation. There is no destination waiting for them, no runway. The descent itself is all there is.
Finally, the emergency lights flicker back on, revealing the absolute devastation inside the cabin. Several rows are now entirely empty. The cockpit door, which is usually our ultimate symbol of control and safety on a flight, is just hanging wide open. But the most terrifying detail is what lies outside those tiny windows. The text points out a terrifying absence. There's no ocean, there are no clouds. The entire natural world is just gone, replaced by an endless black sky.
The author ends the entire narrative with this massive, final, cosmic horror twist. Outside the windows, floating in that endless void, the passengers see burning aircraft just drifting around their plane like dead birds. This surreal, incredibly nightmarish visual completely cements the existential dread. They aren't just crashing, they've crossed over into some twisted, purgatorial airspace that is literally filled with the remains of other doomed flights. And finally, Part 5. Deconstructing the horror.
So let's break down the core fears the author is tapping into here. First, claustrophobia. You are completely trapped in a tight space with zero chance of escape. Second, that profound loss of identity and reality. Forcing the characters to look at their own missing person reports creates a massive psychological break. And third, the terror of the unknown void. Swapping out a normal night sky for a purgatory of burning planes taps right into our most primal fears of what actually lies beyond death. The author weaponizes these universal human fears to keep tightening the grip of suspense right up until the very last word.
I like to call this the escalation curve. It starts down here with relatable anxiety, that totally mundane fear of turbulence that we all know. Then we hit the supernatural intrusion, which breaks all the rules of reality with the silent vanishings, the hollow-eyed creatures, and that jaw-dropping 1996 reveal. And it finally peaks at cosmic despair, with dragging chains and an endless black sky full of burning planes. The story builds so masterfully, step by step, taking us from the mundane to the totally surreal to manipulate our fear with absolute precision.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this one final thought. Imagine you're sitting on a freezing, shaking plane in the pitch dark. Your phone loses its signal, only to suddenly light up and display your very own missing person report from decades ago. What would you do? It's that kind of lingering, unshakable dread that the author instills so perfectly, proving just how much absolute power can be packed into carefully crafted microfiction. Thanks for diving into this with me.